Vielen Dank, dass ich meine Forschung zur digitalen Geschichte vorstellen darf. Vielen Dank an Professor Thorsten Hildmann, Professorin Suyan Moon und Frau Althage für die Einladung und Organisation. Das war alles Deutsch, das ich kann. So this presentation is something that I've done about 2 or 3 times, so it might not be totally new, but I've tried to tweak and add more details that might suit for today's audience. The title of my presentation is Rethinking Sinicization Through Data, a network analysis method for the Yuan dynasty studies, and it will be a kind of mixed match of what I have done in previous studies. So the contents of today's presentation will be a little bit on the background, my own take on what the methodology is, some preliminary results that I have to share because this still is an ongoing process, a limited analysis and comparison of what this means, and as a final point, I wanted to add a few points on what my take is on digital history. So, for the background, as Professor Hildmann said, yes, I am a historian of the Mongol Empire from the 12th, the 13th to 14th century. Basically, Genghis Khan, and his successors who built one of the largest empires in world history, land-based at least. And the main question that scholars have been asking about this is basically, how in the world did the Mongols, as minorities, do this? How did they conquer the world? How did they also succeed in ruling the world in such a large scale? And with this question in mind, the second background I wanted to introduce is, how in the world did I end up in this? So as Professor Hildmann said, yes, I did do 2.5 years as a postdoc in the Mobility, Empire, and Cross-Cultural Contract in Mongol Eurasia EIC project at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. That is the photo from my homepage, which is about, I think, almost 15 years old. So if I don't look like that, that means how I looked when I was younger. But what I did was a kind of first stab into what I could do as digital history. And what I basically did was a lot of translations. So the Mongol Empire database that we built, and I think we're contractually obliged to share it because we have done it with EIC funding, but even I have lost access to it. But what this was is basically, we have the original source, and I could say that I typed it into this, but it's already available in the digital text. So we pulled that together. And then we first added the original text to put in the database, then provided the English translation. So this was what I did for 2.5 years, provide a lot of English translation to classical Chinese. And then as a database project, we also added all kinds of different data points. So where did this source come from? Who are the people present in this place? What are the places? What are the periods? And we also had terms like, what are the keywords here? So as we can see, we didn't actually tag the text itself. We only had these reports as one unit of analysis, and then added these as keywords attached to this, what we called one single report. Whether that was the best way or not, that's another question, but that's what we did. And then so we ended up making this database of the original source, English translation, data tagging, and keyword tagging. So in many ways, depending on your familiarity with how databases are made, this is more closer to a kind of encyclopedic approach, where we wanted to provide this as to give access to people who could overcome the different language boundaries and add keywords that could provide a little bit better way of searching stuff. But in this database project, I was lucky to have the opportunities to be exposed and learn more digital historical tools. And my task was, how do I incorporate what I have learned both in building this database project and also the digital skills like the workshops, the kind of short sessions we had together to do with my research. Now, the biggest problem or challenge I had with dealing with the sources is, how do we deal with so many names? So I'm assuming that there are not many people who can read Chinese, but this is basically a page of the source that I read, and everything that is marked in yellow is basically names. So a lot of names. And one thing that I realized is that um, I'm as an undergraduate, I'm a language and literature major. I don't like reading novels. My head is very bad at processing multiple characters, so uh, I'm just bad at names. I'm realizing that as I'm teaching my undergraduates, and like it took me one semester to get that name. So with all of these names, how can I make sense of it, and what is any way to deal with all of these different names more effectively? That was the challenge that I had. And my jump into digital humanities and applying digital skills to these research was actually based on a more traditional research. So what do I mean by that? As part of being a member of the postdoctoral project, you have expectations to publish something. So yes, I also published something that was not really in the realm of my original research. It was an article named From Military Leaders to Administrative Experts, the biography of the treacherous minister Temudero Ajiste Shudien, 2018, so it's already quite old. But it was discussing basically the image of the Han versus the non-Han. So the Han who were the conquered and the non-Hans and how they changed over time. And it goes back to the question, how did the Mongols as the rulers change over time? And in this process, what I realized is that basically the period here is, overwhelmed with the image of conflicts, clashes between these different ethnic groups. So we have the Mongols who became the conquerors, and we have the not the Han individual who were the conquered. And one clear example that showed this is this phrase from the early 14th century, and it reads as it goes. During the age of the Huangqing and the Yanyo era, so Chinese history had these reign titles. Like instead of calling it 1312, it's like having some fancy title with what? So we have MAGA 1, MAGA 2, MAGA 2, MAGA 3, and now we have like MAGA 2.0 starting next year with President Trump coming back, I guess. That's the kind of things that we have. But during this age, for every failure in politics, people always said it was due to Temudero, this Mongolian minister who was considered as a treacherous guy. And for every success, people attributed to this Chinese scholar named Li Meng. And the idea that, the Mongols are bad guys, the Han Chinese are good guys, this is a persistent image that we have in the sources. However, as I was reading some of the sources, this was an interesting passage where, our treacherous minister Temudera is assigned to work together with different forces and people. And one thing that I realized is that, yes, there is a lot of non-Han Chinese marked with the red, but it was also a mix of Han Chinese together. So despite this image that, the Han Chinese were always kind of, bashing heads with the non-Hans, we see that the kind of complex and kind of mixed relations between the different groups. And again, these are anecdotal evidences, but how do I make a bigger kind of point out of that? That was a question that was always looming in my head. One final background that I have to understand, that I have to introduce, is the idea of Sinicization. So, right before I was preparing this presentation, I asked ChatGPT if there's anything similar to the discussion of Sinicization in European history, and it said the kind of Romanization of barbarians. That was what is prepared, but it's a quite familiar concept. Like you have Kublai Khan, one of the greatest rulers of the Mongol Empire, who got, interested in the Chinese culture and then became, Sinicized and kind of lost his identity. And to some degree, that is how the Mongols were so successful. Now, of course, some people will say that this is like, flogging a dead horse. Like we no longer talk about Sinicization anymore. It's an old concept, but it's still a powerful idea that remains within this, even in the scholarly world. So what examples do I have? So this is a 1993 book. It is one of the most often read books about the age of the Mongol Empire. And in this book, it discusses the people who served under the rule of Kublai Khan. And what you can see here is that all of these red names are the Han Chinese, and all of the blue or burgundy are the non-Han Chinese. And you can see that, in Kublai's era, it was seemingly dominated by the Han Chinese, the majorities, the people who were conquered, the people who existed and lived during this era. And the question that I wanted to ask is, how true is that, and can I use digital methodologies to maybe provide a different image? So that was the kind of various questions that I had in mind as I was going in. How do I work with the names? The question of Kubilai and Sinicization, and is it flogging a dead horse or is it the perfect straw man? And then what can I do beyond qualitative studies based on key individuals? With that in mind, let me now go into the methodology. So the methodology that I used in my research is, quite basic, quite rudiment, in the sense that I am applying network analysis to a relatively small set of data. So what do I mean by that? Again, text, yellow, names. How can I make sense of this? So I started by reading what is known as the Wonhee and used the names as nodes for network analysis. And I just realized that not everyone might know what the Wonhee or the official history of the Yuan is. So let me give a brief overview. So the Wonhee or the official history of the Yuan is one of the long series of what is known as official histories in Chinese historiography, and it is a very much dynastic source. So the current regime since the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century kept detailed records of the activities in the central court. It started with the records of the activities at the repos, basically when the king stood up, they wrote it down. When the king sat down, they wrote it down also. And then it was kind of condensed to daily calendars, daily records, and then reorganized once again to what is called as veritable records, 实录, which means that it's been, verified and checked over times. And then once a dynasty falls, the successive dynasty would collect all of the materials that was done by the previous dynasty and publish an official history. And that's why I like that translating this as the official history book, because it kind of holds a kind of snarky or maybe like slightly controversial term of this is what the state wants you to believe what it is. And in the end, what we have is a very detailed record of key individuals and key events on a chronological order. So this year, this happened, and these are the people involved. That is basically what we have in this period. So yeah, we have those names. And for my analysis, since I was trying to think how many individuals in the central government were actually these Han Chinese people, I only looked at the central government and only officials. So who else might be other than officials? Well, basically, a lot of the people here who are listed in these events are imperial princes of the Mongol Empire. But I mean, they are always important, so they're not the primary source of analysis, so I excluded them. And here is something that I introduced, which it is the one that I'm not always too sure if it works or not. So I proposed an idea of a cooperation network, which means that if you read the sources, basically it's like this event happened. Like we want A, B, and C to work on this together. And when A and B and C are kind of assigned to work together, I linked them together and put an edge network between those different names and consider them as one kind of group. So what does this enable us to do? It means that it enables us to identify groups of individuals working together. And once you have the different sets of nodes and edges together, you can also calculate the centrality, which means that the hypothesis here is that the more that people assign to cooperate together, the more that an individual is involved with other people, that could be one hint that that person is important. And simply by doing that, I propose that the centrality of this network analysis, people show the importance of people not as the absolute one, but one more kind of quantitative, more verifiable, and consistently applicable methodology to understand who in the world was important at this era. And to go a little bit nerdy in terms, this is based on the eigenvector centrality, which means that the more weight you have if you're more connected to other people. And again, by doing so, my hope was that I could go beyond anecdotal evidence and provide a more quantitative approach. Now, since I've done this presentation multiple times, I have run into a lot of caveats, so this is the time for an FAQ, a frequently asked questions. Professor Cho, is it perfect? No, but what if the world is perfect? That's my slightly snarky but also true answer. Is it flawed? I mean, no, I don't deliberately try to make a flawed program, but I do have to admit that this is based on my human reading of the text. So yes, there might be one or two mistakes because I am a human being and I am a flawed individual. Suddenly I'm being a Christian or kind of confessing my sins upon God, but no, that's not the point. Okay. Can't you automate it? And yes, there are methodologies to, search names within the text and possibly connect them together. I think there might be some kind of coding way to do that. But again, I'm dealing with a relatively small set of sources and small set of names that the time to make a code to calculate this, to kind of check the code and see whether the code has worked or not, that will take more time than me doing this in person. And maybe if I try to do this in a more larger scale at some point to different periods, maybe that might be a time to introduce other more automated method. But as of now, I still feel much more comfortable doing everything by myself in hand. Can you be more precise and add more data points? Like, my data is only based on whether this individual is a Han person or a non-Han as a kind of two categories. Some people will ask, like, there are all kind of different groups within the Han, and there's all kind of different ethnicities in the non-Han. Can you do anything like that? Short answer, no. We don't have enough data to do that. In many cases, all of these names that you see here, we are extremely lucky if we have any other source to give more details about who these people are. But in most cases, these are just names that suddenly pop up in the text and then never appear again. So do I know whether these people have some kind of fixed ethnicity or not? Very limited opportunity to know. Sometimes yes, but in most cases no. We'll go back to later. So I can only see them having an unfamiliar, non-standard, non-Han Chinese name, and I just simply label as non-Han. And there's really not much that I can do beyond that if I want to have some sense of consistency within the data. Oh, and yes, I am also two historians to simply make arguments on quantitative analysis. So I'll go back to this later in the final slides, but my take on what digital history is much limited as using it as a tool for reading the sources in a more close manner. Okay, so this is the kind of setup that I had. These are the kind of big questions that I was trying to ask. And for this presentation, I'm sharing the data that I have not published yet. So the article that I shared previously, I don't know how many people were able to read it or how maybe challenging and suffering it was to read, but those were work that I've done from previous periods. And for today's presentation, I wanted to focus on the early years of Kublai Khan. So what happened in this period? So I only had time to cover the first 20 years. I said the same thing about 6 months ago. I'm still kind of stuck with this, so please forgive me for that. But to understand this period, a kind of brief history of what was going on. So in 1259, Kublai Khan proclaims himself to be the Khan. He's still in this competition with his younger brother, who also insists that insists that there's a kind of internal political struggle between the two brothers. And the three key events that happen in this period is 1259 to 1263, which is a rebellion from Li Tan. So Li Tan is basically a Han Chinese warlord. That would be the kind of best way to understand who he is. And he was considered a once confidant of Kublai Khan, but later betrayed him and kind of started the new rebellion. So, as one of the most recent works about the Mongols have said, the Li Tan rebellion further degraded the pre-coronation dreams of Kublai and his advisors and created a serious breach in Kublai's trust in Han Confucian officials. So that is what people know about Li Tan. The second point is from 1263 to the declaration of the Yuan in 1271, which is considered to be the kind of hallmark of the Sinicization of Kublai Khan. So before Kublai Khan, the Mongols seemingly didn't care to call their years following the give reign titles following the Chinese tradition. But in 1271, Kublai Khan declares what is known as Yuan as a state, so a kind of Chinese version of the of what he considers the state name should be, and that is one indication that he was seemingly leaning towards Sinicization. And then from 1271 to the fall of the Song dynasty falls to the Mongols after resisting them for the longest time among the various foreign forces at the time, and they become the subject of the Mongols in 1279. And then an overall of what this happens. So these are the three different periods I had in mind, and with that, this is your eye candy that I present to you. Now, with all of the kind of Han Chinese names and the Chinese characters, it might be confusing to understand, but to give a brief background. So the teal/green colors are all of the non-Han individuals. The red or the burgundy are the Han officials, and the size of each node is based on their eigenvector centrality. So based on this image, you can see that this guy, who we should read as Ali, seems to be one of the most important non-Han officials. We have Shi Tianze, who is seemingly someone that many people know. He is a Han official who has a rather important centrality here. In reading the period in these 20 years, I found that there's 126 officials that were worthy of putting into this analysis. And of these individuals, the non-Han were 57, which is a 45%, and the Han were 55%. So basically, on a year of 20 years, we can see that the Han officials were quite dominant, the majority within this period. Now, what does it mean? Of course, to understand it better, we have to have probably a more comparative analysis of what this, but keep this number in mind. Now, as I said, I divided these 20 years to three different periods. How can you do that? Well, that's my historical intervention. Like, if it's 20 years, shouldn't it be 6 years or 6 years or 3.3 months or something like that? No, this is a decision that I made based on my historical analysis, and this was from the year 59 to year 1263, where Kublai was seemingly betrayed by the rebellion of this Han Chinese warlord Li Tan. So in the first period of this year, we have the teals as the Han officials, we had the burgundy as the Han officials, and it's already looking very red, very communist, if you want to say that. Korea is in the middle of this political crisis with communism, that kind of stuff, for those who have been following the news. And not surprising, of the 56 individuals in the times, the non-Hans were only less than 30%, and the Han Chinese were the absolute majority, with being 71%. However, when we go to in phase one, we also, if you look at the top 10 individuals who have the highest eigenvector centrality, of the top 20%, we have 8 who are Han and 3 who are not Han. So all evidence shows that the early years of Kublai Khan's reign was dominated by Han Chinese officials, be it in the kind of overall figure, or if you look at the top 20%. As we move on to phase 2 from 1262 to 1271, we have a slightly different image. So teal is again non-Han officials, burgundy is the Han officials once again, and this time we only had 39, which is slightly less than I had expected, but still the Han Chinese are still the majority, but the number is kind of shrinking. And if we look at the eigenvector centrality of the top 20%, in this case it's only 8, we see that the Han are still 4, non-Han 4. So we see that the number of non-Han officials are kind of increasing within this period. When we go to phase 3, which is 1271 to 1279, again, same image, same color, and this time we have 70 officials, and in this period, the non-Han are 52% and the Han are 47%. So this is the first time when we see that the non-Han have kind of surpassed the number of Han officials. And again, for the sake of consistency, if we look at the top 20%, then we have non-Hans being 9 and the Hans being 6. So we have a kind of reversal. So basically, based on these 3 different time frames, if we do a more overall analysis, I'm getting ahead of myself. I have those as my slides. So if you look at that, let's think about change over time. So in phase 1, 2, 3, and over total, you see that the number of Han officials are shrinking. Initially, they were 71%, they go to 58%, and then they come to 52%. If you look at the top 20, then the Han shrink from 72% to 50% to 40%. So what does this mean? Well, as the Cambridge history of the Mongol Empire has said, is there evidence of distrust on the Han officials, especially after Kublai Khan is betrayed by one of his close Han Chinese warlords? Maybe yes, but nothing actually visible. We don't have Kublai Khan saying like, I hate the Han Chinese now. We don't have this kind of visual written sources, but the kind of overall trend that we see shows some interesting thing to think about. But there is one explicit concern of too many Han officials in the government. We have this one source that reads like this. Subsequently, orders were given to the Privy Council Humboldt and the others to inform the Central Secretariat, the Bureau of Military Affairs, and the Central. So the Central Secretary, Zhong Shishong, the Bureau of Military Affairs, the Shu Mingyan, and the Censor at the Wishita are basically the 3 most important government organizations of the central government in the Yuan dynasty. These people report the following. Many southern scholars in the Harlin Academy and various other positions, including those serving as prime ministers, inspectors, and darogas, these kind of local officials bearing the tiger tally, have been appointed inappropriately and excessively. Discuss ways to reduce and eliminate such appointments. So we do have evidence that there was these concerns in this period that somehow the Yuan government is being overwhelmed by Han Chinese officials. With that, the hypothesis that I wanted to suggest is that, yes, scholars for a very long time have considered that the reign of Kublai Khan was dominated by Han officials, but it might have been a temporary exception, not the norm, based on the increasing percentage of non-Han officials as times go by. And in some case, we might be able to blame the civil war that happened between Kublai and Arik Bokeh. So Kublai Khan was actually had a huge succession crisis with his younger brother. The younger brother was located in Mongolia. Kublai Khan was located in the northern China area. So maybe because Kublai had suddenly lost ties to the previous non-Han officials in Mongolia to his younger brother, maybe he was just forced to work with the people around him who were located in the northern China and were obviously Han Chinese. However, based on the decreasing number of Han officials, we might see that utilizing Han officials was merely a temporary expedient measure that didn't last that long. Now, again, I've given the numbers within the Kublai period, but what does it mean for other periods? So the data for Temuro Kaishan Ayurubharuwada Khan, that's just a tongue twister. These are the names of the successive Khans in the Mongol Empire, and the data from these later Khans are from the article that I shared. But as you can see, for the limited period in Kublai Khan, we seem to have a less number of Han Chinese. But later, in the Temuro Khan's era, in Kaishan Khan's era, in Ayurubharuwada Khan's era, the non-Han are always quite dominant. 70%, 87%, 73%. This seems to indicate that as time goes by, the Mongols in their rule of China always had a much more favorable and dominant composition of non-Han officials. So with all of this data here, the next question that I have to ask is, why in the world did we think that Kublai Khan's era was dominated by Han Chinese? Again, why do we have images like that? Why do we have these books where they have a representative list of the people who worked in the era of Kublai Khan, and why are they all dominated by Han Chinese? Of course, we have rebellious and treacherous officials, but that's another story. So, to understand that, again, we have to go back to the sources. And one thing that we have to think about is the imbalance of available sources. So what do I mean by this? Again, a brief history into Chinese sources. These official histories are composed with various different elements. The part that historians read the most is what is known as the basic annals, which is the kind of year-by-year event list of things that happen. And then in the later part, we have a huge section which is known as the biographies. These are kind of individual-centered records of the people who are active / important in this area. So that is what we call the Yuan. And for example, I said that I analyzed 149 individuals from Kublai Khan's era, and based on my research, only 44 of them have their biography in the Yuan. So the other 105, right? 149 minus 44. Yeah, I'm bad at math, and I'm still doing these two humanities. But we have no supplementary detailed biographical records of the other 105 individuals. They are people whose names just suddenly pop up in the source without the further explanation. And this is even less for the non-Han officials, because of the 20% of the 114 individuals, 16 are Han and non-Han, and 11 of the 16 Han officials have their biography, but only 4 of the non-Han officials have their biography, which is 44%. 4,400%. No, that sounds like some kind of crazy inflation going on in some country. No, that's my mistake. So basically, we tend to have more information of the Han officials with their biographies, but for the non-Han individual who seemingly played an important role, we just don't have the amount of detailed data to think about. And so once we see their name, we mostly think, oh, do I have any more data about this? No, let's pass and move on. And yes, again, this is what some people call the Sinocentric problem of the Yuan, that, the Yuan is based on written by Han Chinese, has details of the Han Chinese about the Han Chinese rule of China. But ironically, it's my network analysis based on mostly on the Yuan reveal the importance of the non-Han officials. So with all of that, the preliminary conclusion that I've reached from this 20-year presentation analysis is as on the screen. The network analysis of the Yuan dynasty officials from 1259 to 1279 suggests a significant shift from initial dominance by Han officials to increasing representation of non-Han officials, reflecting a broader trend of changing power dynamics and administrative strategies under Kublai Khan's reign. Something that is worthy of further investigation and a homework that I have assigned to myself but have been overwhelmed with other tasks. So, as one final remark, I just wanted to share some of my own insights on why I'm doing digital history and why I am being able to join this group of digital historians. So, the why question: why in the world are you doing this? It's almost like asking why, of the multiple subjects of history, why did you end up in the 13th and 14th century, and why did you end up with the Mongols? To me, it was interesting, and it kind of piqued my curiosity. I mean, I found it interesting, I found it fun, so it's something that I ended up doing. On the other hand, for me, it was a modest attempt not to fall behind in recent research. So, I won't go into too many specifics, but I don't want to fall behind and kind of rely on all of my research and teaching based on the things I learned from 20 years ago. And on the other hand, I did realize that using digital history has its utility. So network graphs and visualization as a presentation tool is a very effective way to present my argument more persuasively. Maybe deceptively, because people like these graphics and think that it must be something important, even though there's not really much behind that. Oops. And also, I like doing these quantitative methodologies as an alternative to giving anecdotal evidence. Like, yes, I could write this same article saying that these are the underrepresented people who should receive more attention. I can give you these examples. Yes, that is one way to do that, but I still think that doing this quantitative analysis, bothering and spending my extra time to make these network graphs and calculate the centrality does help providing more persuasive evidence to the point that I want to make. However, on the other hand, I am still a very much old school person, at least for me. So what do I mean by that? This is a point that I'd like to introduce to everyone who's asking about digital history, but I think whether it is digital or not, I think it's extremely important that for historical research, questions are first and methodologies are second. Like, we've all gone through these kind of different methodological approaches, be it economic history, cultural history, or economic history. Like, yes, it's good to know what kind of different new methodologies are coming out, but those are tools to ask your questions. And if you don't have a good question that you want to ask, then you're merely picking up a skill that may or may not be relevant in your research. Which also leads to the second question is, and this is something that I'm really thinking about, like, is historical training a zero-sum game? So what do I mean by that? With the kind of, threat of the danger of humanities and people sometimes thinking digital methodologies are alternative, are we spending too much time on picking up methodological scores of digital historical analysis that we may or may not use in our own research? And in this process, are we maybe losing time on the basics about source analysis, raising questions, understanding context? Is that a zero-sum game or not? Are we ending up making a generation of historians who have been less familiar with asking these sharp historical questions and simply picking up the skills that might not be useful for their own research or not? That's a question that I am kind of struggling with working with my graduate school here at Yuan University. And the reason that I say that is, for me, I still believe that DH is merely a means to rethinking the sources and reading the articles. I know that some people might not agree with this, but that is what I feel most comfortable with. And that's another point that I want to emphasize as we think about how we use digital tools for historical research. With that, yes, this is a proper time to say thank you very much for your attention. And I'll be more than happy to kind of hear your questions and see what I can do with your comments and questions. So thank you very much. And